Hello and welcome to Golfcast Lincolnshire, the series for golfers and golf clubs right here in our amazing county.
Hi, so Sam Vickers, physical performance coach, and I'm based over at Woodall the National Performance Centre, as well as do work over in Lincoln and online. So my kind of work varies in terms of where the golfer's based, depending on the golfer's needs as well.
The tagline on your website says creating better golfers through physical training. Are golfers more inclined to look at technique first rather than heading to the gym?
Yeah, absolutely. I think golfers traditionally, kind of with how probably golf coaching works, it's very much technique focused first and foremost, which isn't necessarily wrong. It just means that golfers, in their mind at least, will think they need to get to a certain technical standard before exploring probably other areas of the game to improve.
So if they think they're going to get in the position of Rory McIlroy, they'll actually hit the ball like Rory McIlroy.
Absolutely. And then, there's obviously some truth in if you're a beginner golfer, you naturally got a lot of work to do probably on some of your technical points up throughout all areas of the game. But actually, you only have to kind of look at golfers across the board, from beginners down to someone who's played plenty and is sort of maybe say a 10 handicap, all the way up to pros. There's no such thing as kind of perfect technique, and everyone moves slightly different. So the argument could be is you want to be looking at kind of how you move physically before you look at how you move technically.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even when I look at myself on camera, the body can change so much from day to day.
It does, yeah. There's obviously lots of different factors that, essentially affect how you can and can't move, but also other factors that not necessarily whether you can do it, almost to kind of a psychological element of how you determine or perceive your movement in that current moment. So I think that's kind of often where we see golfers will feel like they swing well on a driving range, for example, compared to out of course, because it's a very different environment. So mentally you move differently, but also that then can lead back to the physical side, because if you can move more efficiently with your body overall, that will have almost an easy effect taking your kind of mental aspect onto the course and under pressure.
So that can bridge the gap between the freedom that you feel when you have a basket of balls on the driving range compared to the lack of freedom you feel when you are on the first tee on the golf course.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, kind of a big part of what I do and conversations I have with players across all levels, and I think that's quite important, because it's not exclusive to elite players, which is typically the physical side. Typically that's kind of often the perceptions is I need to be at a certain standard before I explore that, and kind of with that in mind is the conversations that I have with players is if we can get your body moving more functionally, more athletic, depending on what the needs are of that individual. So some people, it might be more flexibility or mobility, others it might be more strength, speed, power. Combination of everything is the reality, is that ability to create a more consistent and reliable motion in your golf swing can then be transferred to the golf course a lot easier, which can build confidence. It can build that, kind of take that fear away that probably doesn't exist on the driving range, but then all of a sudden on the golf course that fear creeps in, because you've essentially got a golf swing and a movement that is created around timing and essentially just trying to feel the club head, as opposed to using probably your bigger muscles and working with that overall more stability is the best way of putting it.
So really talking about spatial awareness there, knowing where the club is in relation to your body when you swing, basic bat and ball skills really. That a lot of golfers either don't work on, don't realise, or don't possess. Now, you say on your website that you do individual training plans. What do they actually look like?
Yeah, so kind of my coaching kind of principles and philosophies to treat everyone as an individual. That probably does get that term probably gets thrown around in all forms of coaching in general. But why I think it's very powerful with the physical side is the individual, the needs vary depending on their lifestyle, their occupation, their just training history in general, sporting history. Key one is obviously injury history, and then what their goals are for their golf and how those impact. Because all those different variables almost create a very unique physical profile for that individual in front of you. So it might be a case of you've just got someone who works 9 to 5 in an office-based job. They're a weekend golfer and they're just trying to play with less pain because they might have a lower back problem from more than anything, probably just from their occupation.
Yeah.
Their training program will look quite different to someone who, say, a professional golfer comes along and says, I want to add 30 yards. So that's where that kind of individual aspect comes into play, and then it's being able to implement a plan that is actually achievable. For me, is everyone can get results physically that impacts their golf directly and indirectly in many respects. By when I say indirectly, I mean kind of how that could impact you on the course mentally, less mental fatigue, better decision making. That's kind of like a byproduct of actually being more physically active. But then directly is obviously we're looking at less prone to injury, which is a key one for all golfers, especially amateur golfers and older golfers. Increasing that club head speed, which is a big factor we know in terms of reducing handicap, or probably how far your handicap can be reduced. And then probably the key one that often gets overlooked with the physical side is being able to achieve swing mechanics that the player actually is trying to achieve, or they're trying to achieve with a coach. They're trying to get in a position that is simply not attainable or certainly consistently achievable. So by being probably, say, more mobile in a certain area of the body, that allows it to get into that position better. It's more reliable, it's more consistent, and in turn we get those end products.
So do you experience any resistance to the idea of getting physically fit for golf? Because most people just say, well, it's a walk in a park, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's, absolutely. Golf is, I'd refer to it as golf culture, really. Is golf as a sport is predominantly, seen as a bit of an old man's retirement hobby. Probably people like John Daly, certainly from the past. You probably have to look at some of your better golfers in your golf clubs that the kind of other golfers will look at and say, well, he's a very good golfer, or she's a very good golfer, but they're not in physically good shape. So actually the physical components of golf is not that important. And kind of, it makes sense why that's why you're behind in many kind of what I would class as sports science areas compared to a lot of other sports.
Yeah.
So that's something that is changing. We know it's changing because you only have to look at kind of the top of the game. That is always a reflection of where the amateur game will be in sort of 5 to 10 years' time. So there's a resistance there because essentially it's changing people's perceptions and thought processes around how it will impact their golf.
So does that manifest itself as an age difference then? Do you find that most of your clients are sub 30, sub 40, or do you find that some are a little bit older?
I think it's down to the individual predominantly, because when we think of the term, which is kind of dubbed as golf fitness, that kind of means different things to different people, based on what they perceive as fitness to be in general, based on what they perceive the physical components required for good golf, and then probably also based on probably what they've seen on social media, or maybe in a golf magazine, or their local pro, what he does or she does physically or has done. So those three individual components create a picture that in golf, the realities are fundamentally incorrect. It's golf physical training in a nutshell looks 95% very similar to how maybe a rugby player would train, or how, tennis player, for example. The physical components are not too different in golf compared to many, many other sports if you want to add certain elements to your game. So like we talked about earlier, speed, more stability, more postural control, things like that. So I think kind of answering that question in a overall sense is, it probably comes back to the individual and their background to be able to say where that resistance comes from. I've got clients who are in their 70s, and they've started with me or started strength conditioning in their 70s with virtually no history. So that gives you an idea that age is certainly not a barrier, injury history is not a barrier, health is not a barrier. But when those individuals came to me, they've probably come to me thinking, right, I'm at a stage in my golfing life that if I don't probably do something more physically, I'm not going to be playing in 3 to 4 years' time. But at the same time, I might have an 18-year-old come to me who's already a good player, and their coach is saying to him, right, if you want to achieve more in this game, and it might be certain swing positions as we talked about, then we'll be looking at the physical side, but the language would be very different from me than it would be, say, to a 70-year-old. So does that kind of answer the question in that respect?
Yeah, and it answers some of the misconceptions as well. It is an explosive sport. It does require power and strength, and yet most people's physical training for golf is how many balls can they hit at the range, rather than how much time they can spend in the gym.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of further to that, I mean, sorry, it's just come to mind. It's relevant to that. I worked with a sports therapist who worked for a professional football club, and we had a common client. He did a bit of private clinic work. We had a common client that was working with, and we had a conversation, and he had no understanding of the game of golf. He didn't understand the demands of it. He didn't understand how the body really moved, but he was still someone who was very high up in sports science world professionally. And he said to me that, well, golfers need to train more like endurance athletes. And I was almost like, I was shocked that he perceived that for someone of his knowledge base. But actually looking back, it's like, okay, well, actually, yeah, maybe that's where these misconceptions come from, because we look at golf and think, well, we're out on a golf course, walking around, doing lots of swings. So it's actually about, can we just be fit enough to do that and keep that endurance going? Whereas in the reality, as you've just mentioned there, it is a power-based sport. You take one golf swing more often than not with a 2 to 3 minute break in between. That golf swing is typically performed at probably 90% of that individual's maximum effort. Regardless of how fast that is for the individual, it's still probably 90% their actual physical effort. So that actually, when you put that out, that sounds closer to maybe doing a 100-meter sprint than it does a marathon.
So from a physical point of view, what common issues do you see in most golfers, particularly those over 40?
Yeah, typically three main components, and it's the same, again, across all levels. And it might be a combination of these, might be all of them, or it just might be one clear area. Number one, it would be, injury history. They're either struggling to play golf because of an injury or a pain, or they're struggling to move in their golf swing how they used to because, again, of injury or pain, or they're looking like they're probably going to have to stop playing or play less because of that injury or pain. So the injury and pain is a significant one because that affects so much. Another one would be kind of loss of club head speed. So, as they get older, they're losing distance, they're losing speed, or they've just never had that, and they feel that actually, if I'm going to continue improving, I need to hit the ball further. And then a more generic one typically is their occupation. So kind of what does their general day-to-day life look like, and how is that impacting them physically? So kind of those three areas would always kind of be looking at them and how they interlink with what they're trying to achieve.
Do you find that a lot of players swing incorrectly for their body type? They're trying to emulate a swing or a player who doesn't look or move exactly the same as them?
No, 100%. And I think that's probably a little bit as well where golf's changing, in my view, with the coaching aspects, and then people like myself coming in. You know, a typical process would look like an individual would come and see me, and I would undertake a physical movement screening with them. So I'd basically be able to identify how their body can move from head to toe, all through the joints, and where they're kind of limited. That might be a natural limitation that they'll never change. It's just unique to them, so their anatomical structure. Or it might be, again, through an injury or their occupations that means they've lost, say, mobility in a shoulder joint. So when they swing that golf club, you know, we'll take the right shoulder for right-handed golfer. They're probably going to stick their right elbow out a little bit and struggle to keep the club on plane. Knowing that information gives almost more confidence to the player, because when you put it in the right way, it's a case of going, right, this is how you move naturally. So although that swing technique doesn't look like Rory McIlroy, it looks like you. And therefore, as long as we work around that with you and your coach, or sometimes players who don't have coaches, they can still implement it themselves, then they're going to create a really good swing mechanic and movement that is right for their body. But on the flip side, we might say, well, we can do something about this. We can increase some mobility in that shoulder, which will allow you to kind of to keep the elbow in more, or flatten the club, however you want to put it technically. But this will require you doing something about this physically to get your technical change. And again, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, well, if I do want to swing it better, and I do want to maybe achieve some better positions that in their mind at least looks like one of the players on TV that they're chasing, they know that they maybe can achieve that or closer to that if they put some hard work in physically. So you've kind of got two ends of the spectrum there, but you're almost putting the power in that player's hands and giving them a bit more of a choice. And I think that's why my work is, when I'm working closely with a golf coach and the player, the information that can be provided to the coach as well allows the coach to be able to create essentially a golf swing that is at optimum for that player in front of them. So it's kind of that teamwork, and I think that's how golf is certainly evolving more and more, with, at least from my side of things.
I know even for myself, I've changed my swing 3 or 4 times over the last 20 years, really to sort of, I suppose, fit in with the coaching methodology of the day, you know, whatever the hot swing was at the time. And now I'm swinging it better than ever because my swing shape matches my body type. So for me, getting to a position like Dustin Johnson, 6'4", hands in orbit, is not going to work. My swing is very flat, very rounded, very rotational, because it fits my body shape and my swing pattern, and that's why I'm playing my best golf. So a lot of players will look at YouTube or pick something up from a player they look nothing or move nothing like at all, and yet try and emulate that, and that's really where they're going to go wrong. So, golf performance and improving our physical performance in real terms, that's going to be gym based, isn't it? Or is it something you can do at home?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's where it interlinks with the individual side. I mean, more than ever is obviously just the general person in society will go to the gym or do some form of physical activity to keep in some form of shape or health, whether that's for a health problem they've got, or they just know it's just part of their lifestyle. So again, if someone comes in who already trains, it'd be very much a case of going, right, well, we don't need to change your routine too much. We just need to probably give you the right information so you can maximize that training, and it interlinks with your golf more. Whereas someone, who comes in, which is probably more common, who all their free time and resources are spent on playing the game they love at the weekend or in the evenings, so on and so forth. So it's trying to fit something that's not going to stop them playing as much golf or practicing as much, but is going to give them just enough to make an improvement in the areas they desire. So it can be something as simple as setting up 5 exercises that takes 20 minutes to half an hour every other day from home with no equipment whatsoever, or very minimal equipment. So we're talking like maybe resistance bands or foam rollers or a few dumbbells and weights. And I think that's that's the thing. Everyone can make a change depending on where they're at and their lifestyle. And again, that's where that individual side comes into play. But I think in that same breath, and the reason I state this and want to put this across is, again, typically golf strength and conditioning as being perceived as stretching and a few body weight core based exercises. And although that can help and does help a lot of people for us to get, progress us into a certain physical level, there becomes a point where that actually stops having an effect. And like I said, the reason I state that is because what we said earlier, golf is a power sport. So if you're going to improve your power, you're going to need to improve your strength. And improving your strength isn't going to come through doing some stretching or a bit of foam rolling every other day for 20 minutes. It's going to come from resistance-based training, which looks, you think of the typical athletes who you'll see them in a gym, they'll be, got a barbell on the back, they'll probably be squatting or deadlifting and something like that. That realistically is the type of training golfers should be aiming towards, but that is quite an advanced level that a lot of golfers might take years to get anywhere near. So it's kind of like finding that balance where the input is actually going to lead to something, but at the same time, we don't need to reinvent the wheel to get that. And I think typically golfers will either overdo it in one area, get absolutely no benefit for the golf, or they'll completely underdo it through fear of either, our common one is getting too muscly and big and bulky and tight, or getting injured. And the reality is, if you train properly for your body type and your goals, there'll be no negative side effects to it. You're only going to get those positive outcomes.
So really there's a sweet spot for the training. Too little, you're not going to get any benefit at all. Too much, you potentially get injured, overtrain. And really, it's something that if you get it right, you should see some fairly quick wins, some fairly instant results, within 6 weeks or so. We should be able to get some real performance improvements, both on the golf course itself, but also on the scorecard.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this lockdown period has been really interesting for me because I've had to change the way I work and communicate slightly by moving more online. I'm not able to see those individuals one-on-one, which I'm not able to see up close and personal as well on how they move and those kind of little nuances that come with coaching that you'll know yourself. Yeah. But actually, what I found is it's helped even more in certain cases. I've taken on some new clients in the process where one was coming just to add clubhead speed, and they've added in a 4 or 5 week period, they've added about 4 to 5 mile an hour clubhead speed through just training at home with some basic, with virtually no equipment. The reason that's happened is because they understood exactly why they were lacking it through the physical feedback and probably a bit of explanation of where speed can be increased in their movement, but also they lacked mobility. So we can increase mobility quite quickly if you're very stiff, should I say. So if you're already at a place where you're stiff and immobile, just by doing the right stuff, we can increase that quite quickly. Whereas in another individual who really lacks strength and power, we've seen a progression, but it's been very small progressions because they don't essentially have, to increase those strength and power outputs is going to be a lot longer process. It's going to be about smaller gains, but that in turn is actually help them just feel a lot more stable through the ball. So there's always that kind of saying is that low hanging fruit is, majority of golfers, even professional golfers. And I think this is why the physical side has become so big, if you will, in professional golf, because you've got the world's best players, and let's say 80% of them are not actually doing anything physically, and what they are doing is not really helping them because they're not necessarily training properly, like we talked about earlier. So they've got this low-hanging fruit where they can probably increase their performance output by 10 to 15% in the space of probably 12 weeks. And I always say, well, if that's the case for an elite player, think what those returns are for an amateur golfer.
So what can players expect to see How do these improvements manifest themselves? Are they big handicap drops? Are we seeing big performance gains? Let's say driving extra 20, 30 yards further. And have we got some personal bests on the course and actually breaking their own personal best scores?
Yeah, I think this is where the physical side and possibly I differ slightly to some physical coaches. I don't know, but I spend a lot of time, certainly early doors, in setting out some very, very clear processes and essentially goal setting, kind of a link into a bit of the psychological side with the player and their coach, or probably just the player, to get to the nitty gritty of, well, what are we trying to achieve and how long have we got until we see those returns? Because if your handicap decreases over a 6-month period or however long that may be, realistically, we're going to probably have to put that down to some subjective feedback from the golfer themselves. They might say, well, I feel like I don't fatigue on the last 6 holes as much. I might feel a bit more stable over my drivers, so I'm hitting more fairways. So you've got that side of things. Then you can measure it from the statistical side, but that's another area of golf that's probably not quite in place, certainly with a lot of amateur golfers, but we might look at strokes gained. So if they're kind of hitting the ball further off the tee, and that's leading to them gaining strokes with every other part of the game, we know that the physical side's having an impact. But then the more kind of in-depth analysis, where we'd look at the physical components by measuring speed qualities, power qualities, strength qualities, and range of motion in joints that are key to the golf swing, we've then probably got a bigger picture where we can bring all those factors together and see where those performance outputs are in place. But if we take just your average weekend golfer, a lot of them are probably just coming and saying, right, I'm feeling stiff and I'm feeling like I've got a bit of a pain in my shoulder or my lower back. It's affecting my golf swing. I'd just like to feel like that's not a problem anymore. So 6 to 8 weeks time, we might be saying, well, I've got no pain, feel more mobile than I've ever felt, more freedom in the golf swing, and I feel like I'm hitting the ball better. And sometimes that is more than enough of a quantified, progression, even though we're not necessarily quantifying, it's just subjective. But sometimes that's more than enough for most golfers.
Yeah, and a lot of players will have experienced aches and pains, especially after playing, say, 18 holes. And a lot of these aches and pains will be down to a former injury rather than anything to do with the swing.
Yeah, 100%. Funny enough, I had this conversation literally just the other day with a player who said, every time they get to the last 5 or 6 holes, no matter what their score is, they always feel like they're fighting their swing. Do you think that's a mental thing? I was like, well, it could be a mental thing, but maybe the root cause is you don't possess the muscular endurance. So your swing starts to fatigue, or your swing movement starts to fatigue. You're then essentially trying to control the movement with your hands and arms to time it better. You then obviously, we know the strike might decrease and the direction might decrease. So all of a sudden it becomes a mental factor, but it's not the root cause of that. It's a physical, essentially the general physical fitness in quality that's preventing you from being able to finish the last 5 or 6 holes as strong as you like. So I guess that links in as well to the indirect components of physical fitness. And again, I think that's where the goal assessment and digging a bit deeper to begin with is we can actually probably identify 2 to 3 different areas within that player's limitations that all relate back to the physical side, because at the end of the day, that's your engine, that's your controller of everything you do on that golf course.
Yes, I know from my point of view, after 14 or 15 holes, I tend to get a really sharp pain around the knuckle of my right big toe. And that's obviously an old injury, which is being exacerbated by the motion of the golf swing. And obviously the incredible forces that I'm using in it must be the reason. But it says on your website you've got a 6-week training guide that people can get a flavour and a starting point and then hopefully explore deeper.
Yeah, I kind of put that together a while ago now where, I wanted golfers to have, those who were either unsure or not familiar with it, to be able to see what that strength conditioning for a golfer should look like. Because typically you type in on Google golf fitness or golf strength training, whatever it may be, and again, a lot will come up of the type of training that actually most golfers don't need or shouldn't be going anywhere near for a long period of time. And then if it's self-directed, it's like that golf will go away and do way too much of it. So an example would be, believe it or not, golfers shouldn't spend too much time, certainly in the early stages, doing rotational based training, which sounds, a little bit counterproductive because it's a rotational sport. But that's kind of the point, is golfers spend so much time rotating in their golf swings that it's not that they don't know how to rotate, it's that they probably can't control certain rotation in certain areas of the body to create more in other areas. And that's where that loss of stability comes from, loss of club head speed and injury. So we want to be focusing on a lot more strength-based work, the right type of strength training, the right type of mobility work, and the right type of power work that will actually allow those physical qualities to transfer to the golf swing. And it's something that talked about actually recently is, you see a lot of stability balls and people standing on stability pads training the golf swing or trying to get more stability, when in reality is that's actually only going to decrease how you coordinate stability in the golf swing. So it's a case of knowing what to do and why that actually does help you golf. So that program is put together to understand that a little bit deeper, to give a structure of how you'd start from the beginning and progress over 6 weeks, how you'd improve certain physical qualities, with a little bit of guidance in the process of doing that. So it's kind of an opportunity to do something that is mostly safe. And I say mostly safe because obviously I can't assess that individual's injury history or how they exactly perform that technique. But sometimes that's not always that important. As long as the individual is following the instructions and building it up slowly, the body will cope with those demands. And that's 90% of people who get injured from training is because they do too much too soon. It's as simple as that. It really is. The body just can't. It's not ready to adapt to the demands. So that hopefully will allow people that time to improve in a way that won't negatively impact them in the short term, but will also transfer to better golf essentially.
Now, I spend a lot of time in primary schools increasing golf participation with young pupils, particularly Key Stage 2. And it worries me a lot that a lot of young golfers who are specialising only playing golf at such a young age. Some of these are barely in Key Stage 3, and yet all their time is devoted to golf. Shouldn't we be training multi-sport athletes? Isn't that going to be better for their sporting development overall, rather than specialising at such a young age?
Yeah, it's a bit of an ongoing debate, isn't it, in sort of all sports really, is what is the best way for a kid to develop safely and effectively and maximising the key qualities that are required to play better sport. And golf is a huge culprit of that, where it does specialise far too early and in a lot of quarters is promoted to do that, which is a shame. And I think a lot of that does stem back from probably the misleading stories of Tiger Woods starting to play when he was 5. I mean, anyone who knows deeper than that knows that Tiger Woods was highly athletic and plays multiple sports to a high level. So I think there's a few misconceptions of where that stems from. I think there's a bigger picture to that, is physical education in schools now on the curriculum is as bad as it's ever been, which means that the next generation, regardless of whether they play golf or not, probably don't probably are not developing. Well, I say probably, no, they're not developing, because I've got experience of this with multiple juniors. The key physical qualities, the physical literacy, which it can be referred to, that they should be, that's going to help them later in life, whether that's, not burning out too early, injury problems, movement quality, just general health, even cognitive development. So I think golf has a huge role to play in that, or can have a huge role to play in that. But how we go about that is quite a complex area.
Now, my daughter's year 6. She's 11 years old. She's a keen golfer. She's got 32 handicap. So she's got some real talent there. She can really play. But I want her to experience a lot of sports, not just golf. Tennis. I want her to get involved with the football team, which goes to secondary in September. Because I think that's going to be beneficial for her physical literacy and make her a much more rounded athlete overall.
Yeah, I think adding to that is the question. It's not, is it the coaches that should be controlling this? I think they've got a role to play in the bigger picture, but probably parents who are pushy a little bit towards their young one, wanting, we want them to be the next generation of elite golfers, so therefore we were going to just specialise in golf at a young age. The question would be, well, what does golf, just playing golf, what does it not offer that other sports can, that will bring huge qualities later on in their development? And that's a tough question to answer, really, because a lot of people will look at, say, a sport like football and say agility. Well, is agility relevant to golf? And you could say no, it isn't. But you could dig deeper and say, well, actually, it relates down to things like decision making and moving quick under pressure, and how the joints and the body is having to move at high speed. Although the movement isn't exactly the same, the physiological adaptations and development that occurs at a younger age can then transfer over into the golf swing, which can lead, if they want to play better golf, and certainly if they're looking to play probably elite golf, which a lot of youngsters are who are really keen, is that actually is going to have a huge impact on whether they do or don't. But there is an argument on the flip side that if the youngster is the one who only wants to do that sport and nothing else, and they're controlling that, there's been no input from the parent or coaches, it's the youngsters saying, I don't want to go do that sport right now, I just want to go play golf. Then there is an argument to say, well, who are we to affect that, essentially? But it's a quite an open-ended question, isn't it?
Yeah. If you look at the elite players, a lot of them could play a lot of sports at a high level. So from my era, Ernie Els, for example, was a very good tennis player and rugby player, but he chose golf, thankfully. And a lot of the Americans at the moment, came from a baseball in winter, golf in summer background. And so it's interesting to see how multi-sport players develop seemingly much better overall. Now let's look at some real-world examples here. I'll protect the names of some of my clients who may recognise themselves in this, but this should give you an overall feel. Player A is 61 years old and plays off a 34 handicap, and the target is to break 100. They work in an environment which is largely office-based, and therefore they sit down an awful lot, or predominantly in the day, and they've got a poor range of motion and poor flexibility for golf. The swing is quite short and fast, and they have a real problem with low point control. So they duff it 1 minute and then top it the next. So how would we go about improving this player?
Yeah, so again, it comes back to that low-hanging fruit assessment, is being able to go, well, what's your background? Why are you immobile in the key areas? Is it just simply a lack of flexibility, or is there some other physical qualities that means you essentially can't move through those joints very well? And then we'd be kind of looking at kind of the reality is in this sort of situation is there's a lack of mobility there, which is probably through a lack of movement over a long period of time. So, spending a lot of time in one movement position or pattern, whether that's computer, desk, driving, probably sat on the sofa a lot, or just playing a lot of golf because you spend a lot of time in golf posture. So essentially it'd be looking at trying to increase some range of motion back into the areas that's going to help them rotate more freely, probably create a bigger turn overall, which give them that bit more time and space through the swing and into impact. And how, one of the key big principles that I try and educate golfers on is, if you're going to increase your mobility, it might actually be down to a lack of strength. So you may lack range of motion in a joint because you're not strong enough to move into that joint safely. If you think about it in a really simple way, is the brain will just automatically protect yourself from injury. So it would never allow, let's say, the shoulder joint. If we just raised it above our head and kept our arms straight and tried to see how far we could rotate it behind us, some of you are going to be able to rotate it past your ear, and some of you are probably going to struggle to get it in line with your nose. So we know there's a range of motion issue in that shoulder joint, but is that because we don't ever go into that range of motion? So it's a principle of, if you don't use it, you lose it. Or is it a case of there's a lack of strength in the muscles? So let's say we're quite dominant in the front of the shoulder and we're very weak in the back of the shoulder. Yeah. So that kind of shoulder joint is being pulled out of position, can't move freely. And actually we can stretch it and we can try and mobilize it as much as we want. But until we get stronger and more balance through the joint, we're never going to be able to actually get into that range of motion and control it in a golf swing that's required. So there's lots of really big health purposes to that. It's almost, I often say, is with amateur golfers, your golf swing leaves a clue. It's almost, I can often look at golf swing and pretty much tell instantly where they're lacking and if they've got any injury history or pain there. So when you look at it that way, you go, well, let's look at it the other way and go, well, actually, if I want to improve my golf swing and probably how I hit the ball and shoot lower scores in turn, I probably need to be looking at the health of my body and movement.
Yeah, so a lot of players enter golf with a lot of physical biases from previous sports they've played or previous movements they've made. And as you say, the body leaves a clue. So let's look at the next player. So player B, he's a lot younger. He's maybe 30, 32, and plays a 23 handicap. So he's very keen, wants to get right down into single figures if possible. Is very active, maybe a construction type job, and very sporty as well, very much a football background. But his golf swing is all about speed and trying to hit the ball as far as he can. It is just about blasting that ball 350 yards down the middle of the fairway. The problem is he doesn't find the middle of the fairway very often, because although he's very fast and a lot of clubhead speed, he can't keep the ball on the planet. So he's very, very wayward. So how do we go about helping him?
Yeah, so I think that's where my role becomes quite a bit different, is where, again, those goals are essential, because it might sometimes be a case of something that's been missing biomechanically, so kind of how they're moving technically in their swing. So I might look at their swing mechanics from not how they're necessarily moving the club alone, but their kind of bigger body movements and how they're, if they're able to generate all this speed, where are they having to compensate, or where are they losing that reliability of delivering the club face more consistently to keep their accuracy? So it might actually be that there is still a mobility issue somewhere that's leading to a compensation, even though they've got great speed and they look wiry and they're turning more. it might actually be there's still a mobility restriction.
So the frame that he's hanging the swing from could be weak and unstable.
100%. And I think, again, when we think of certain occupations or backgrounds in sport, we think, okay, well, plays football and he works in constructions, typically a stronger individual, and they are, but the chances are they're probably lacking strength in key areas that is relevant to the golf swing. Yeah. And they're probably, the key one is are they able to essentially, they've got all this speed, so let's think of it more as acceleration. They can create huge force capabilities easily, but can they essentially slow that movement down? So think of de-acceleration. I always use a little bit of an analogy of saying, imagine a Ferrari with mini brakes. Do they need bigger brakes to be able to control that speed? And see that very, very often with typically probably, the male who, like you say, plays a bit of sport, has played a bit of other sport, probably has quite a physical job. So they've got some good physical capabilities, so they can hit the ball further. But are they really utilising those physical qualities almost, is it a detriment in its own right? And I think that is probably what we often see with those golfers is they lack the stability to control the speed.
So we might not be actually looking at the swing itself, but more the frame. So the chest, the core, the legs.
Yeah, bigger muscle groups. Those, best way of probably putting it is postural control. Right. How are they moving their posture at speed? And the compensations kicking in there. You typically think of a golfer who generates a lot of speed is there's often quite a lot of leg action. They might have a huge turn with the arms, but not a very efficient turn. They might spin their hips quite early. They might get a lot of kind of lateral side bend in the upper body, so that sideward bending, leaning back on it or hanging back on it. So they're the type of movements where you can see, well, they don't have the postural control to maintain, maximize and control that speed and force.
Thank you so much, Sam, for joining me. Just remind the listeners where they can get in touch with you so they can make a change to both their health and their game.
I'm on all social media, SV Golf Performance, and I've got my website, SV Golf Performance, with lots more information on there, kind of what I do and the processes. I do actually offer a free consultation over the phone for anyone who has just basically any questions or concerns, or, they might already train and think, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. Can I just get a little bit of advice? They might be worried about an injury and is it safe to train? So just kind of that free chat, no commitment, more there for support than anything. And I'm based obviously at the National Performance Centre over at Woodall Spa. So that's kind of where I do my one-on-one work, but obviously we've got the online training as well where we can do it over line. And I think more than anything is, I don't want people to think that I have to commit to a big training process, like we said at the beginning, join a gym or anything like that, spend lots of money on equipment. Is depending on your goals, depending on your history, and depending on your needs with your golf, are all the factors that will essentially determine how effective and efficient your plan needs to be, and that is individual.